This is the second part of the workshop on recovering Yeshua's initiatic teachings from the Gospel of Thomas. Logion 8 is quite important. It's towards the very beginning of this collection because it refers to a basic and essential understanding of Yeshua's Kabbalah. However, it seems to have been a public story, because at the end it says, whoever can understand this, let him make of it what he can. It's an allegory of a fisherman. He's called Paroma in Coptic, the man, and in Greek that would be the anthropos. The anthropos was a term for the primordial man, or a primordial or archetypal humanity. In this case, it refers to the Bar Enosh. It refers to the so-called Son of Man, or the Messiah. It says, the Bar Enosh is like a wise fisherman. The term wise in Aramaic and in Coptic it means something like this: man of good heart, a person with a good heart. The Bar Enosh is like a wise fisherman who casts his net into the sea and pulls it up full of small fish. Among them he finds one good large fish. That wise fisherman threw all the small fish back down into the sea without regret, but chose to keep the large fish. Whoever can understand my parable, let him apply it to his own life. Well, a means of fishing without a boat was to stand on the shore and wade out in the reeds and cast a net into the Galilean Sea and pull it back in, and it would be full of all kinds of things, and you'd pick and choose what you wanted to keep in order to eat. And the implication in this parable is that the big good fish that's being kept by the wise fisherman is one he's going to eat. The idea of the eaten and the eater is something we saw expressed in the Logion about the lion who is eaten or becomes the eater. It means to absorb into oneself. It's kind of an allegory of something being brought into oneself and then transforming that self. For example, if the lion, which is the rage, the evil force, is consumed, he's eaten, he's swallowed, then he's pacified. But if the lion is allowed to take over and a person starts yelling and cursing and doing negative actions and raging and so on, then the lion has eaten the man, so to speak. Well, by the same token, the eaten is the fish and the eater is the fisherman. And that means the fish is taken into the body of the fisherman. So the story is about the Bar Enosh who, after death, selects through the souls of those who have died, and the ones who are Mahatmas, great souls, the one that is a great soul, he keeps and he eats, and it absorbs and becomes part of him and part of his nature. So the new humanity, the Christ, the Messiah, the Bar Enosh, the Son of Man, who shares God's divine sovereignty in heaven, judges human souls as they arise after death from the sea of existence in mortal flesh. Now, you have to remember that Yeshua does speak about the Son of Man as a judge and as selecting and separating the sheep from the goats and things like this. So here we have the Son of Man as a fisherman who is selecting from what the net pulls in, and he throws the others back into the sea. Well, this is an allegory of his teaching, which is not given specifically here because this is a public parable. It's spoken of his teaching that after death, those who are worthy of the Shema, they will remain conscious and be absorbed into the body of the Bar Enosh if they have been spiritually reborn. Now, not just because a person is righteous doesn't mean necessarily that he becomes part of the Bar Enosh, but part of the new humanity. because there are many righteous people that are simply part of the Kima. They are standing ones in the Pardes, and they will go through another process. But those who in life have uh, gone through the process of spiritual rebirth manifest allegorically like a big and beautiful fish to the fisherman, and is selected to be eaten by the fisherman, to be taken into its corporate being. So the Tzaddikim achieve Kima and may merge with the body of the present and future perfected and sovereign humanity. This is Hieros Gamos. This is also represented as divine marriage, a marriage of the soul, the bride and the bridegroom. It comes out in Gnostic ceremonies as the bridal chamber. Yeshua's Kabbalistic messianic wedding banquet, and so on. These are all allegories of the being absorbed into the body of the reborn new humanity, the Bar Yanash. Logian 11. This heaven and the one above it shall pass away. The spiritually dead are not alive, and the spiritually alive shall not die. In the days when you ate dead things, you made them alive. But when you enter into the eternal light, what will you do? On the day when you were one, you became two, but now that you are two, what will you do? There's a lot of Kabbalistic teaching here. We're going to start with this heaven and the one above it shall pass away. This is obviously based on a theme of impermanence. There are 10 heavens in the Merkaba cosmology, but the very cosmic foundations of the earth, the first and the second heavens, shall pass out of existence. Now, the first and the second heavens are the physical heavens that we see, the day heavens and the night heavens, the two Shemayim. The spiritual heavens are the third heaven, which contains the Pardes and also Gehenna, and all the way up to the 10th heaven, the throne of God. Those are not impermanent. They will not pass away, but the first two will pass out of existence. If we look at the pre-exilic concept, the Hebrew concept of the day and night Shemayim, the day and night heavens, we can visualize it perhaps this way. We have the earth, which is flat, and we have two skies that revolve above the earth, the day sky with the sun in it and the night sky with the stars in it. Below the earth is Sheol, where the souls of the departed sleep, and what's called the great deep. And then, separately, something that is really out of all these dimensions are the heaven of God, or the heavens of deity, the place to which the prophets ascend when they bodily ascend, etc. It's not part of the physical structure. Now, the post-exilic 10 heavens that we have after the time of being in Babylon, we have the first two heavens, the day heaven and the night heaven. And they are physical. But the third through the 10th, the third containing the Pardes and Gehenna, that is Eden and Hades, one would call it. The fourth containing the host of heaven, the fifth with the fallen Nephilim, the sixth with the archangels and the phoenix and the cherubim and so on, the seventh with the Ophanim, the eighth the heaven of stars called Mutzaloth, the ninth the zodiacal houses called Kuvachim, and the 10th Aravoth, where the throne of God is. These are the immortal heavens. The first and the second heaven will disappear. They will eventually, at some time in physical reality, they will be gone. We're told that, in so many billion years, the sun will destroy its solar system, eat all its babies, and we'll be goners. That's the kind of impermanence that Yeshua is talking about, cosmic impermanence. But these other these other seven heavens, third through the 10th heaven, are the eternal olam of the Abba. They are the place of spiritual reality that is permanent, and that's the place where eternal life is. That is, not meaning eternal, not meaning long number of years, but meaning the state of existence, the state of being. And these will not disappear. They will not be gone. They will not dissolve. Logian 11, to continue after this heaven and the one above it shall pass away, the spiritually dead are not alive, and the spiritually alive shall not die, and so on. Spiritual life, we should say, is the life and consciousness of one who has achieved the Kema, the resurrection, the personal, individual resurrection, through righteousness in life. And that is something that is experienced in the seven eternal places. We also have an eating metaphor. In the days when you ate dead things, you made them alive. And the idea then that when one eats food, that becomes part of oneself. If one eats the lion and successfully conquers and eats the lion, then the courage of the lion becomes part of oneself. That's the basis of a lot of ancient ideas about eating parts of animals that give you the powers of animals and things like this. So he says, in the days when you ate dead things, those are the days that you are in the body, eating flesh and so on. You made them alive. You made them into your body. But when you enter into the eternal light, well, what is the eternal light? The eternal light is the Ein Sof Or, the primordial light that is like a cloud that obscures the image or the form of any form of Godhead from human vision. So when you enter that light on that day, when you enter that light, when you ascend and you have ascended in the Shema, what will you do? Meaning, what will you do for food? Because when in the days when you ate dead things and made them alive, what will you do in the days when you enter the eternal light? What will you do for food? And the question is a kind of a question that is asked by a rabbi in Kabbalistic instruction. A lot of instruction is asking questions of the students to ask them to think. And we'll find that in several of other statements of Yeshua, these Kabbalistic statements. This is definitely a summation of inner circle Kabbalistic teachings, not public teachings. On the day when you were one, you became two. Well, the day when you were one was the day when you were Adam Kadmon. You were part of the human archetype before you were incarnated and given gender and personality and so on. On the day when you were one, you became two. Adam was divided into the sexes, so in incarnation, one enters into duality. Now that you are two, now that you are in this dual world, this world of duality, now that you are a certain gender, a certain sex, and so on, what will you do? Again, the rabbinic question, the question of the teacher, puts it to his students. This rabbinic rhetorical question expects a paradoxical answer. What will you do? The days when you were one, you became two, but now that you are two, what will you do? Well, the answer is you will become one. You must become one. You must become shalem. You must become whole. This relates to Logian 22, which we shall examine next, the whole issue of the unity, the halakha of returning to divine unity. First part of 22, Yeshua saw babies being suckled. He said, "Those who will attain the Malkuth are like these newly begotten ones at a mother's breast." Now, this term, newly begotten ones, the Aramaic word yeled, newly begotten, became the Greek paidion, which is child, then Coptic korie, small children, which is used through the logia that we find in Thomas concerning disciples. It has a very special meaning. The term meant newly begotten in reference to the Johannine birth that is from above. You must be born again. This is an initiatic term. We find it in other forms of religion as well. In the Greek chthonic mysteries, the kouros, or the young man, was the name of an initiate. The initiand was led into the initiatic places by kouroi, by young men, and very often they're young children. In fact, the iconography we have of the cherubim, of cherubs, little baby angel type things, when we know that the cherubim were originally the sacred animals, bulls and things like that, was a development of the idea of initiatic, the initiatic child and the child that's initiated. In fact, the galacticon that's referred to in the New Testament, or the milkstone, was given to the newly baptized disciple in the pre-Pauline churches to symbolize neophyte status at the breast. That's what the significance of the milkstone was, as well as purity. And the sephos, or the smooth stone, used in Greek election, would represent their elect status. In Gnostic initiation, the stone used may have been a pearl, a white pearl, because the pearl was symbolic of the immortal soul to the Gnostics, as we will see in the Hymn of the Pearl. Yeshua's meaning of newly begottens was lost in Christianity. Those who were newly begottens were those who had been spiritually reborn in the Bar Enosh, in the Christ. They were little Christlings. They were his disciples. They asked him, "Therefore shall we, being newly born, enter into the Malkuth?" And Yeshua answered them, "When you make the inner as the outer, and the outer as the inner, and the above as the below, and etc., which we'll look at very soon. What is this, when you make the inner as the outer, and the outer as the inner? Well, one of the words that Yeshua used was se'ef, and he contrasted that with shalem in Aramaic. Sepheth means divided, dual. Shalem means whole, complete, unified. The normal state of humanity is fallen, meaning having separated itself from heaven. That is why we are dual. We think one thing and say another thing. We are hypocrites. We don't say what we mean or mean what we say. That's why Yeshua said, "Let your yes mean yes, and let your no mean no, and so on." Now, Yeshua's term for this fallen state, this divided, this dual state, was se'ef, divided. Now, when the division is healed or unified, then one becomes shalem, or whole, perfect, like all heavenly beings. All heavenly beings are shalem, which is allegorized as being androgynous, or as being both male and female, or father and mother, whatever. The inner as the outer. Well, Yeshua taught his disciples to make their hearts single, to not be double-souled or double-minded, to speak and act without guile. Let your yes mean yes and your no mean no. In other words, be the same person on the outside that you are on the inside, and make the interior person one of integrity, truth, and virtue. This is a very simple way of describing a major part of the halakha of Yeshua, which is to achieve perfection, spiritual perfection. So this halakha for unification and integration was an inner circle teaching on the process of remedy for being, in the Greek word we find in the New Testament, dipsychion, or double-souled. In Aramaic, it means literally the same thing. It's very often translated as double-minded, but it means double-souled. And this refers to the ongoing conflict of good and evil impulses, the Yetzer HaTov and the Yetzer HaRa, in each heart. These are the good and evil Yetzerim, or the good and evil inclinations. The good and evil inclinations need to be transformed into the image of God. And that is done by not empowering the evil inclination and by empowering the good inclination. And it's like a garden. If you favor one tree out of two trees, eventually the one tree will take over the whole territory and the other tree will fall away. And that is the idea. This is not a matter of unifying the good and the evil impulses. The evil impulses are not real to begin with. They're like a shadow. A better analogy would be a tree in your garden and the shadow of the tree. You don't want to integrate the two. They're already integrated. What you want to do is cause the tree itself, the real tree, to grow and bloom. When you make the inner as the outer and the outer as the inner and the above as the below, we're going to look at that. And when you make the male and the female into a single unity, etc. The above is the below. The Johannine Genesis, or spiritual begetting, Genesis is the way it's usually pronounced. That is from ano, from the above. That is very often translated by fundamentalists as the second birth or the new birth. But it literally says in the Greek, the spiritual begetting that is from the above. It's not the same as being reborn. It's based on the Hebrew Aramaic yeled, to beget, and the newly begottens are called from the same root. The Coptic word for the above is pe, sky or heaven, and this means to make the man of flesh into the perfect man, or the bar enash. So to make the above as a below and the below as the above, etc., is to unify the heavenly and the earthly. It's to receive, therefore, what would be, in one sense, could be interpreted allegorically as a wedding, as a hieros gamos, as a unification. It could also be interpreted as a begetting, of being born again, because it's the union of heaven and earth, which in this case would be the masculine and the feminine, because the disciple and the followers of Yeshua were feminine with regard to heaven. That's the Jewish Kabbalistic allegory from which Paul draws on his idea of the church as the bride of Christ. Now, the process for this transformation is known in the New Testament Greek as hagiosmos, and that's for Aramaic mikdash. Hagiosmos means sanctification. The Aramaic mikdash is from the root kadosh, holiness and heaviness, and means sanctification, consecration. Yeshua's halakha was centered on sanctification, and it was done by yourself. It was you who either sanctified or defiled your own soul. It was your works that were effective in this, not what you believed or what you thought or what your theology was. The unification of heaven and earth was understood as a divine messianic wedding or marriage, a hieros gamos, a conjunctio. The sacrament of the bridal chamber, the Gospel of Philip, was derived from the messianic Haggadah about the marriage feast of the Bar Anash, or the marriage of the Lamb in Christian apocalyptic terms. And this was symbolized in Yeshua's messianic Seder or Shabbat meal, breaking of bread with his disciples. They shared the bread of the morrow. That is the teachings and the nourishment that came from the Olam Haba, from the Messianic age, and as a foretaste of the life of the Malkuth, the life of the coming sovereignty. Now we want to look at the Kabbalistic bride chamber and the Gnostic bridal chamber, because that illuminates much of what we will find in the Gospel of Thomas. We should start out by saying that in Kabbalistic teaching, sexuality in marriage was a metaphor for union with Godhead. For example, in Kabbalistic Haggadah and lore, on Shabbat Eve, the evening of Sabbath, Adonai, that Godhead as a father or husband, made love to Matronit, Godhead as the wife or the feminine. And it was the duty of a husband in a Kabbalistic household to pleasure his wife on Shabbat Eve. And that was in imitation with and in communion with divine union in heaven. Sexual union was an allegory of divine union. The rabbis were not allowed to study the canonical Songs of Solomon, which was a collection of bawdy and explicit Hebrew wedding songs, until they had attained the age of 50, because it represented, not because it was dirty stuff, it wasn't, but because it represented the most sacred of all things and teachings, the highest mystical teachings of Judaism, of mystical Judaism. It could be misunderstood and misapplied by people who were not ready to receive it. Here's something I'd like to read you. The sexual relationship is in reality a thing of great exaltation when it is appropriate and harmonious. This great secret is the same secret of those cherubim who copulate with each other in the image of male and female. Keep the secret and do not reveal it to anyone unworthy. For here is where you glimpse the secret of the loftiness of an appropriate sexual relationship, when the sexual relation points to Hashem, the name of God, compassion, beauty, justice, etc., the divine names of God. So when the sexual relationship points to God, there's nothing more righteous and more holy than that. That is very early medieval Kabbalist Moses ben Nachman, the Ramban as he was called, in his letter on holiness. And that is a Kabbalistic teaching that is of great antiquity. You might want to get Schulman's book about the Ramban. To understand the Kabbalistic bride chamber allegory, we have to understand something about the traditional Jewish ritual for a wedding. Now, in ancient times, prehistoric times, people of a certain tribe or a given vicinity could not intermarry with people in that tribe because they were too closely related to them. It was taboo to marry your sister or others so closely related, and so therefore they had to go to other tribes or other clans for their women, for their wives. And very often that was done by a raid on the other camp to steal the women, to kidnap the women. This very ancient history of snatching brides is recounted in Plutarch's story of the rape of the Sabine women, which is brought to life in a modern musical called Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. But that was actually the way that wives were gotten in ancient times. Well, in a traditional society like the Jewish society that went way back to tribal periods and kept rituals for it, in their wedding ceremony, that what actually happened is the bridegroom came with his groomsmen, in the middle of the night and did a ritual kidnapping of the bride. That was how the wedding was carried out. So the groomsmen would come. It would be nighttime. They would come in a procession. It was done very ritually, and people would have torches and so on. And at midnight he would arrive, and the bride would be all prepared. She'd be all dressed, and she would go with him, and they would go to a place of seclusion. And that place of seclusion is where they had sexual intercourse, and the tokens of the woman's virginity were then displayed, the bloody sheets or whatever was involved. That same ritual was carried on in many traditional societies. And when the bride and groom would go into seclusion, very often they were heckled from outside. In the musical Oklahoma, they do a similar kind of ritual. The bride and the groom go to have their honeymoon, and then the people are outside having what's called a shivaree, which is they're yelling and hooting and hollering and so on. But anyway, that was the root of this wedding ceremony. And then after all that, there would be a banquet that would be put on. That would be the bridal banquet. Now, if we look at the traditional Jewish nuptial ceremonies at Yeshua's time, it's very important to notice that there's no fasting involved, because it was a feast. To fast would have been a deliberate insult to the families. So when Yeshua is speaking to his disciples, he says, "Can the groomsmen fast while the groom is still with them?" And the answer is, of course, no. But if that gets transformed in the New Testament, of course, they have everybody fasting at the wedding because they're being ascetic, etc. And that's all a big change in Gentile Christianity and a misunderstanding of all the rituals. The Messianic bride chamber of Yeshua, which was of which the Seder meal was a foretaste and a participation in. Yeshua compared himself to a bridegroom and his disciples to groomsmen. Well, who or what was the bride? The bride of Messiah, the Bar Enosh, or the Christ or Messiah taught by Yeshua, was Yahida, the highest aspect of a human soul as an aspect of the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. The groom was Yahid. Yahid and Yahida are the divine bride and groom. And Yeshua compares himself to Yahid and his bride to Yahida, the human soul or the souls of his disciples. The archetypal Yahid and Yahida of Kabbalistic thought symbolize the fatherhood and motherhood of Godhead, the Abba. So as firstborn of the Messiah or of the Christ or of the new humanity, and the initiator of human souls, Yeshua had the role of Yahid. His apostles were co-workers or groomsmen, and the bride, Yahida, was humanity. Yeshua's teaching was not a messianic teaching about the coming of Messiah to save Israel. It was about the coming of Messiah for all humanity. In that, Paul was right. Paul and his idea of the salvation of all mankind was correctly applied. That was something that a vision of which even a lot of the original disciples of Yeshua had overlooked. But that is true. Yeshua talks about the Bar Enosh as a new humanity, not just a new Savior for Israel. So Yeshua celebrated the Shabbat Seder as an earthly foretaste of the Messianic wedding banquet. In a Jewish wedding ritual, the wedding banquet was celebrated as a feast after the bride and groom had consummated their union in the seclusion of the bride chamber, and the proofs of virginity had been exhibited. The sexual act of breaking the hymen was allegorized as the shattering of the vessels in creation, the vessels, the sephirot, that established intercommunication between bride and groom as husband and wife. So the Kabbalistic idea of the beginning of Kabbalistic creation, the shattering of the vessels, which starts time and which creates the dualistic universe, is an allegory of the breaking of the hymen. And that is still allegorized in modern Kabbalistic Jewish weddings when the groom and the bride together step on a wine glass that has been carefully protected inside of something, and they shatter it as part of their wedding vows. And that means that all the separate compartments of things have been opened up to intercommunication, so both the good and the bad. And as husband and wife, they will get to know the good and the bad of each other. Now, the Kabbalistic allegory of divine union in the Messiah, in the Bar Enosh, this union was the highest union that a human being could aspire to achieve with Godhead. And that union was that of a lover or a spouse. And in Jewish mysticism, that was represented very often with sexual intercourse. In the case of Yeshua's teaching, that was merely allegorical. The Kabbalistic bride chamber of Yehid and Yehida was a marriage of Godhead with a human soul. That was the unification of a soul with Godhead. It was also allegorized as rebirth of a divine son or daughter of Godhead, in which the perfected soul of the Tzaddik or saint achieved apotheosis, or divinization, in the Kima, or the resurrection. Now, the reason we're going over all this background is so you can understand what is being said in Logian 22 about how perfection is achieved in Yeshua's halakha, the inner and the outer becoming a single one, and so on. I'm going to show you a little bit about my own Kabbalistic wedding. Willa and I had a Kabbalistic wedding when we were married in 1998. Together, we stepped on a wine glass and we shattered it. That was the sacramental shattering of the Sephirot and creating the marriage world that we would have. It was the opening of both the good paths and the bad, the Klippot, to full intercommunication. So, as in the Kabbalistic theory of creation or of emanation, time begins, the marriage begins, the Klippot are released, Pandora's box is opened, and there we have, we now come to know each other very fully in our good and bad aspects. Jewish marriage is not naive. It's not a marriage that is romantic in the sense that it believes that all things will be good in a marriage and always be good. It is very realistic about understanding what marriage involves. After that, we went into seclusion. We went symbolically into a symbolic bridal chamber where we did some of our own private rituals and ceremonies. And then we came back out with a wedding procession that was led by our children, and we began the wedding banquet. We began it with a blessing and a toast with a chalice. So the Messianic bride chamber is symbolic of that seclusion, that breaking of the hymen, that formal act of marriage. And after this, in secular marriage, the wife is given a new last name, that of the husband. In Yeshua's hypothetical Messianic bride chamber ritual I've talked about, a ritual of initiation, the spiritually reborn disciple was given a new name, like Simon Peter, Mary Magdalene, and so on. So these are some of the parallels to understand between Yeshua's Messianic banquet and what we're going to be reading in Logian 2. We should also point out that in one Gnostic tradition, which we find in the Gospel of Philip, which actually has access to some of the same sayings that we find in the Gospel of Thomas, and may take them from the Gospel of Thomas or from a common source. The Gospel of Philip preserves motifs from Kabbalistic apostolic initiation by Yeshua. It does so through its rituals. Now, the Thamasians also considered the highest initiation to be vows of celibacy or marriage to Christ. The Gnostic initiates were given new names, as in Christianity and as Yeshua did. And the Gnostic sacrament of the bride chamber was paramount in the Gospel of Philip. It was a special ceremony that people went through. It was considered to be an operation of chrism. And remember, chrism is the word for oil, and it's the root of the word Christ, because the Messiah is one who is anointed with oil, and that is the root of the word oil also in Aramaic. So it's considered to be an operation of chrism and fire. The Gospel of Philip says there is water in a baptism of water. There is fire in a chrism. Fire equals the spiritual worlds. So the representation of fire was through oil, Christing. The bride chamber ritual was considered by the Philip Gnostics to be superior to baptism. They said, the chrism is superior to baptism. It is because of the anointing we are called Christics, but not because of baptism. So they were preserving a higher form of initiation beyond baptism, and that is an artifact of Kabbalistic rituals and initiation that I believe Yeshua must have used. In Greek, the Philip Gnostics referred to themselves as Christikoi or Christics, Christed initiates. The one reference that we have to ordaining or consecrating the apostles we find in John's Gospel, where Jesus breathes Ruach, Spirit, and they receive the Holy Spirit through the crowns of their head. That is a ritual that is repeated in the consecration of bishops. Here's a photo of modern nuns dressed for their day of wedding to Christ. They go through a bridal chamber. They go through a ritual where they dress as brides, and then they are received as brides of Christ. And by the same token, Yeshua brought people through a form of initiation, probably Merkaba initiation, in which they received union with heaven, which their souls received union with the highest aspect of their souls, the Yahida, received union with Yahid, which represents Godhead. So now when we look at Logion 22, we can get a little clearer understanding. And when you make the male and the female into a single unity, so that the male will not be merely masculine and the female merely feminine, and when you make human eyes to serve as God's eye, and a human hand to serve as God's hand, and a human foot to serve as God's foot, and a human image to serve as the divine image, then you shall attain the Malkuth, the sovereignty. Whoa. Okay, that's a pretty tall order. The unification of masculine and feminine was, on the highest level, the marriage of Yahida and Yahid, and at the lowest level, it was the marriage of the inner and outer self, the inner and outer personality, or nephesh, so that you were the same on the outside as you were on the inside, and that you were pure on the inside, so that a saint, a tzaddik, would manifest in his life and in his speech, in his thoughts and in his actions, or her, the divine qualities of Godhead. The image of the new humanity, of the Bar Enosh, was to be incarnated in your physical nephesh, in yourself. In other words, you were to put on as the term was used in the Gospel of Mary and several other places. You put on the new humanity, put on the new mankind. That was the reference to it, which is like it's almost like donning a cloak or something like that, and put on the perfect anthropos, the perfect mankind. Those are terms that are used in a lot of the material. So what that means is becoming like a heavenly being that was shalem, complete and whole, not merely masculine, not merely feminine, but all of that. One's hand, meaning one's actions, serve for God's hands or divine purposes. So when we say to make a human hand to serve as God's hands, it says to make a hand to serve as a hand, and a foot to serve as a foot, is what it says in Coptic. What it means, I've tried to explicate here, meaning a human hand to serve as God's hands, and so on. The hand always represented one's actions in life, one's works, and to let one's activities and works be attuned to what the divine purposes were for things to occur. For example, to do works of compassion, of mercy, and of justice, rather than of intolerance and of injustice, and so on. One's foot to serve as God's foot. The foot represents the walk, the halakha, or the conduct through life, to be that is specified by heaven. To purify the human image, which is the Yetzerim in the heart, the good and evil Yetzerim, so that it becomes a field of activity only for the Yetzer HaTov, the good image or inclination. In other words, the image of God, the Zelem of Godhead, now becomes part of your own divine image. That image is in the heart, that Zelem is in the heart, and active as the Yetzer HaTov, the good inclination or the good impulse in the heart. So thus one would consecrate and sanctify all thought, word, and deed to the divine ways of wisdom, compassion, justice, all the attributes of Godhead. That is the goal of Yeshua's halakha. And this is an inner circle teaching. This is not something that was specified publicly. And then, having done all that, you will attain to Malkuth, to the sovereignty, to divine co-sovereignty, the co-sovereignty of the Baranash, of the new humanity, the Son of Mankind, sitting on the right hand of the throne of the Abba. You will apprentice the works of the Abba, and you will learn to become a co-ruler with the Abba. You will do the works of God. Let's take a look at Logian 48, which continues this idea of the halakha of attaining perfection, or the state of being shalem. If two were to make peace with each other in this one house, they will say to the mountain, move away from here, and it will move away. This is a davar, and it is a davar that's given in the inner circle teachings, not given publicly, about achieving interior shalem or unity. And that will produce the manifestations of the sovereignty or malkuth or rule of the perfected messianic saint. The perfected messianic saint could perform things that people would consider to be miracles. If two were to make peace with each other, the concept of two is that of se'ef, divided. If one who is in a state of duality makes peace with each other, in other words, if he creates harmony, shalem, he creates unity out of his duality. If he creates something that is shalem out of his se'ef, out of his division, in this one house is in this body, in this one soul, in this one being, it means all the things we've just been talking about, to make the two one, to make the male and the female into a single one, and all these other things we've been talking about. Now, the exercising of the sovereignty of the Bar Anash while still in flesh is something that was attributed to those who had made the ascent to the throne of God, and all saints were considered to have powers to do things like this. Commanding a mountain to move was a Jewish and also Greek expression for exercising divine power. In Rabbinic Haggadah, the metaphor of uprooting a mountain was used to emphasize determination. A great rabbi who was very determined would be said to be uprooting the mountain. Rabbi Eliezer is said to have cried, "If the halakha agrees with me, let this carob tree prove it." And then the tree was uprooted and moved 100 cubits away. So this was a way of illustrating the power of saints. It wasn't that the saint himself would cause the tree to move or the mountain to move or anything else to move. It was nothing that the saint commanded. It was something that was done by nature for him in affirmation of his sainthood. And it was a power that could be radically misused. The story of Moses, the reason Moses was not allowed to reach the promised land, according to the legend in the Old Testament, is that when the people were thirsting so much and they needed water, God showed him where there was a spring and told him to tap his staff there, and the spring waters would come forth. And he did that, but he took the credit for it. He said, "Oh yeah, I made the water come out of the spring," or he let that impression go. They did not give the glory to God, so to speak. And this is something that saints would do when a miracle occurs. Even in the case of Yeshua, it was not said, even in the early church, that Yeshua rose from the dead. It was said that God raised Yeshua from the dead, and so on. The uprooting of the tree is proof of fidelity to God's teachings. It's not as a result of commanding the tree to move by the strength of one's belief that it will move. Unfortunately, in early Christianity, the stories about moving mountains and things were quickly, by the third generation or so, transformed into stories of faith about belief rather than stories about perseverance and faithfulness. And the idea of faith healing and moving mountains by just believing it strongly enough it would happen and so on became things that we find in Matthew's Gospel and other places, representing these ideas of Gentile Christianity. Logian 106 says, "When you make the two one, you will become the Bar Anash. You will become a son of man. You will become a Christ. And when you say mountain move away, it will move away." Well, I think we've explained what making the two one means. It's becoming shalem. From the highest levels, the marriage of Yahid and Yahida, down to the lowest levels of personality. The moving of the mountain was, of course, a phrase that was used commonly in Greek and other Hellenistic thought, but it was also a Kabbalistic phrase conventionally used to represent the power of prophets and sons, that meaning also daughters of God or saints. You will say mountain move and the mountain will move. It was not a description of magical powers that believers would have. It was used by Yeshua to illustrate the power of emunah, or faithfulness, fidelity, perseverance. fidelity to God's ways, not belief in creed or any kind of a theological system. It was wrongly interpreted in the Christian Gospels as being the magical power of pistis, faith, meaning belief, as in faith healing. If you believed strongly enough, you could move the mountain. If you believed strongly enough, all these things happen. If you were full of faith, then you can have these. You can cause miracles to appear, and so on. I'm looking at one quotation from the New Testament up here. Verily I say unto you, whoever shall say unto this mountain, be thou taken up and cast into the sea, and shall not doubt in his heart, but shall believe that what he says comes to pass, he shall have it. Well, I would invite you to try it. It doesn't work, folks. Belief is not the faith that Yeshua taught. Belief is the fiction that early Christianity developed. If you believe in fairies, clap your hands. If you believe in Yeshua, then you know that faith means faithfulness, fidelity. It does not mean belief or mental ideas, which are merely changing things. Your ideas, your opinions, your beliefs and things are going to change all during your life. But the works that you do and the way that you comport yourself in life, that is indelible. That is something that will count eternally. Here's Logian 82. Yeshua said, he who is near to me is near to the divine fire, and he who is far from me is far from the Malkuth. Here the fire that we're talking about is divine fire from heaven, as found in Logian 10, behold, I have cast fire upon the world. Now, that's a very special kind of fire, and we want to look at some of the ramifications of this in Kabbalistic mysticism. Fire caused by lightning was considered to be the proper source for sacred fire used on or near an altar in Babylonian and Near Eastern religion and in Jewish temple religion. Fire from heaven, fire from lightning. In Chaldean cosmology, which greatly influenced Hebrew thought after the Babylonian captivity, the highest heavens and deities have the nature of intellectual or noetic fire. The word in Greek is nous, meaning higher mind. The 2nd century Chaldean oracles of Zoroaster preserve a Neoplatonic synthesis of Babylonian and Greek cosmological theories. I'm going to show you. Notice that the Chaldean name for Godhead, by the way, when we get here, is Father Mother, meaning progenitor, one who generates or emanates. So this is the Chaldean scheme of the heavens. At the very top is the paternal or the fatherly depth. That means the Father Mother. The intelligible triad is the Father Mother and mind, and so on, and all the way down to earth and earthly matters. The inges are very much the same thing as the Hebrew cherubim, and the synokes are the forces that bind it together, and so on. There are many parallels between the vision of Ezekiel of God on his Merkabah throne and temple and Zoroastrian temple and cosmological imagery. They're blurred together in Jewish and Chaldean thought. Let's take a look at some other things here. Notice that at the very height of the intelligibles, the world of supermundane light, and it's a world of light, just like the Ein Sof Or, is the Father Mother. And the lowest aspect is the earth, matter. the elementals of earth. From the intelligibles, there is an emanation that emanates the lower worlds, and that emanates what are called the Empyrean world, the world of the visible lights, and then those of the ethereal world, and then finally the elementary world that we know of, the physical world. So it's a scheme or an understanding of emanation from the highest fiery beings, and mind and light and fire are associated. That is why Zoroastrian astral religion, astronomical religion, was based in the idea of fire and light because of the stars and the sun and so on in the sky. Now, if we look at Kabbalistic cosmology, we have four worlds. The world of Atziluth, or the world of God, which is the boundless and illimitable light, the Ein Sof Or, behind which, as a curtain, as a cloud, an anon of light, is hidden the Father Mother. Then we have the next lower world, the world of Bria and the divine forces, and then the world of Yetzirah, or formation. Now this is the world that's spoken about in the Sefer Yetzirah, the emanation of all reality and being as we know it. And then finally the world of Asiya, which is the physical, material world. And you might notice that the Sephirot, Keter, Bina, Chachma, Gebura, Hesed, Hod, Netzach, and Malkuth, the 10 Sephirot, are both in this scheme superimposed over those worlds, and they also exist separately in each of those worlds. So from the very top of that world, there is what is called the lightning flash, divine fire. And that divine fire in emanation emanates from the world of Atziluth, the other worlds. And then from that, the world of Bria, the world of the archangels. And from that, the world of Yetzirah, the world of the angels, and the world of formation. And from that, the physical world, the world of Asiya. And our place in that world as personalities in flesh, incarnate beings, is on the earth. So you see the comparison between the Babylonian scheme and the Kabbalistic scheme. The two owed a great deal to each other. Much Kabbalistic thought came from Chaldean and Zoroastrian thought. It also came from Pythagorean thought, not from Platonistic thought, though. And in both schemes, fire is spirit, and spirit is fire and light. And in both schemes, all things emanate. And so when Yeshua says that he has cast a fire upon the earth, it is tantamount to saying, I've brought the higher spirituality down onto the earth. Divine fire, divine spark, the divine fire that Yeshua makes parallel to the Malkuth, the sovereignty. What is that? Well, that refers to the divine, what some people call a divine spark, which is the image of God in the heart of humanity. Here are some of quotations from the Babylonian, from the Chaldean oracles of the 2nd century that preserve a lot of these ideas. All things have issued from that one fire. The Father Mother perfected all things and delivered them over to the second mind, whom all nations of men call the first. This is, again, Babylonian thought, but it lies behind Kabbalistic thought. The soul, being a brilliant fire, by the power of the Father Mother remaineth immortal, and is mistress of life, and filleth up the many recesses of the bosom of the world. In other words, everything has soul. Everything has soul and spirit that we see. For the Father, Mother of gods and men placed the mind, and the Greek word is nous, meaning higher mind, in the soul, the suke, the Hebrew word would be neshama, and placed both in the human body. So even in the early Babylonian apocalypses of Enoch, the high heavens contain fire serpents, the seraphim, and luminous bodies of fire, including the phoenix of the sun. The human essential divine nature was described as a spark of divine fire emanating from Godhead. At the firmament, or boundary between the supernal triad of Keter and Hakma and Bina, according to the ancient Sefer Yetzirah, was the mother letter Shin, associated with Esh, divine fire. So Logian 82 is translated from a davar of Yeshua, whose meaning would have been understood by his close disciples. Being those of the inner circle, they were near to the divine fire. Those who are near me are near to the divine fire. Now, it's been interpreted grossly differently. People have said, those who are near to me are near to testing and trial. But that's not what the fire is it's referred to here. Yeshua is not saying if you're near me, you're going to experience all kinds of trial and testing. No. He's not using even the Greek word of parasmos at all. He's talking about divine fire. Those who are near me are near to the divine fire, and thus, and therefore, to the Malkuth, the sovereignty of the Barnash. Those who opposed, rejected, or chose to remain far from him were also far away from the Malkuth.